Can you sketch out a broad framework of what you mean by pleasure? Is there a spectrum in the ways that we can experience pleasure?
Well, as I look at the question, it's not just what I mean, but what a lot of people, how a lot of people relate to the different kinds of pleasure that people experience. And so, for example, it could be uh, high adrenaline kind of pleasure, from all kinds of things, from uh, different kinds of sports, and sometimes very risky sports for some people, and they need something like that to feel pleasure. But there is pleasure, of course, in play and sports. But there are also a lot of life's simpler and quieter pleasures on the other end of the spectrum, where just, being with your friend or being with yourself in nature on a walk, being increasingly present to yourself, to others, to those, to the surroundings can bring a different and more subtle kind of pleasure, which can be profoundly joyful for people. Just to to have those kinds of experiences. And and in between, there are many other different aspects to it. So I just wanted to scope out for everybody that we're really, when we talk about pleasure, we're talking about a broad spectrum of the kinds of contexts and situations where people may experience pleasure. And we're also going to be addressing in this webinar the relationship to pleasure, as we've already started to do.
Yeah. I know, Larry, when we first started talking about this topic, when I thought about pleasure, it was more on this sensory level, sort of through my senses, the pleasure that I get, say, walking
Mhm.
my dog and feeling the breeze on my face. And then I thought about like the heart-centered pleasure that I get. And you've mentioned some of these, but when I feel deeply touched or gratitude, and
Mhm.
that feels like a different kind of pleasure from like the pleasure I get from like fulfilled or content,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Say, in mentoring, for example, there's this way of feeling that pleasure that feels different than the other three. So I love that we're talking about and expanding at least my idea of pleasure and how I experience it. Yeah.
Well, you bring up a really important point, Sherry, because you touched on really several states of being. And I touched on it just briefly myself, just prior to your comments, that part of what is pleasurable is to be really deeply connected, to be deeply connected to our heart. And that can come again, in very big ways, but it can be a very subtle and yet highly charged and highly enjoyable experience. And we'll talk about the relationship between pleasure and expansion in just a few moments, and the importance and the significance of that in human life, and for our understanding as clinicians, how to work with that.